I woke up in a hospital bed, unable to move my own hands, only to hear my son discussing my death like it was a pending business transaction. "Pull the plug," his wife whispered. "We need the insurance money for the renovation before the market crashes." They thought I was a vegetable. They thought the old man was finally out of the way, but they did not know I had just opened my eyes. And by the time they realized I was gone from that room, I had already sold the ground beneath their feet. My name is Cornelius Hatch, and this is how I taught my ungrateful family that you never ever bury a king before he is dead. Darkness. That was the first thing. A thick, suffocating blackness that carried the smell of antiseptic and cold coffee. I fought to lift my eyelids, but they were heavy as stone. I tried to curl my fingers into a fist, yet the signals my brain sent seemed to dissolve somewhere around my shoulders before they ever arrived. Was I dead? Welcome to Honor Revenge Stories, where we tell the tales that remind us what strength, dignity, and patience can build. If this is your first time here, I am glad you found your way. Tap that subscribe button so the next story reaches you when it drops. Before we go any further, drop a comment below and tell me, where do you think a man like this finds the will to keep going? This story contains dramatic elements added for storytelling purposes, and any resemblance to real persons or events is purely coincidental. What matters most here is the message behind it. No, the steady beeping of a machine told me I was still anchored to this world. Beep, beep, beep. Relentless, a digital metronome ticking away the seconds of a life I suddenly no longer recognized. I am Cornelius Hatch. Corny to my friends, I am 71 years old. I spent 40 years as a structural engineer, raising bridges that could outlast hurricanes and skyscrapers that punch through the clouds. I understand load-bearing capacities. I understand stress fractures. And lying there in that hospital bed, I knew my own body had finally suffered a catastrophic structural failure, a stroke. I could feel the deadness along the left side of my face, a leaden weight that frightened me more than any job site accident ever had. But the terror of paralysis was swiftly overtaken by something far colder. Voices. Familiar voices. Close, right there beside my bed. My hearing was the one sense that seemed to have come back with perfect clarity. "He is not going to make it through the week, Everard." The voice belonged to Rochelle, my daughter-in-law. It was clipped, impatient, stripped of any warmth whatsoever. She might have been talking about a piece of furniture taking up too much floor space. "Lower your voice," Everard whispered back. His tone was unsteady, but not from grief. It was the shakiness of a man who owes money. A man who is cornered. "The doctor said he is stable. If he wakes up and finds us talking like this..." Rochelle cut him off. "Look at him. He is done. The stroke scrambled his brain. Even if he pulls through, he will be a drooling vegetable. We have to be practical, Everard. We cannot keep this pretense going." Those words hit me harder than the stroke itself. This was my son, Everard, the boy I had steadied on a bicycle, the man whose college tuition I had paid in full, so he could walk out of graduation without a cent of debt. The architect I had quietly bankrolled when no bank would go near his sinking firm. I had handed him everything, and here he stood over my shattered body, debating when to pull the plug. "What about Mom?" Everard asked. "She is the next problem," Rochelle replied, and I heard the rustle of her expensive coat. "We cannot take care of her, Everard. She has Alzheimer's. She is a burden. Once the old man is gone, we put her in that state facility out in the suburbs, the one that takes Medicare." No. My heart slammed against my ribs. Not Celestine. Celestine was my wife of 48 years. She was the only soft thing in my hard life, a retired nurse who had devoted herself to caring for others her entire career. Now that her memory was slipping away, she needed me. I was her anchor. Drop her in a state facility, one of those places where the forgotten are warehoused and left to fade, and she would die of a broken heart within a month. "We need to sell the house right away," Rochelle went on, her voice falling to a conspiratorial hiss. "The market in this historic district is peaking. That old Victorian monstrosity is sitting on a gold mine. We can list it next week. Use the power of attorney." "But Dad has the deed locked in the safe," Everard said. "We will drill the safe," Rochelle said. "Who is going to stop us? Your mother does not even know what year it is. We sell the house, clear your gambling debts, and finally claim the life we deserve." My gambling debts. The words echoed through my mind. So that was it. Everard had relapsed. I had suspected something when the loan requests started coming in a few months back, but I never imagined he was buried this deep. He was prepared to throw his mother away and let me die just to bury his own mistakes. Rage. Hot, blinding rage tore through my system, surging into my veins and fighting the paralysis from the inside. I wanted to sit upright. I wanted to close my hands around Rochelle's throat. I wanted to shake Everard until the man I raised came back to the surface. The monitor beside my bed began to shriek. The measured beep exploded into a frantic rapid-fire alarm. My heart rate was spiking. The raw force of my fury was trying to finish what the stroke had started. "He is crashing!" Everard shouted, his voice a flawless counterfeit of panic. "Doctor! We need a doctor in here!" Footsteps came rushing in. The heavy doors swung open. "BP is spiking 180 over 110. A new voice called out. "Push 2 milligrams of lorazepam." A cold wave flooded my arm. The rage began to blunt, chemically beaten back. But in that moment of chaos, I made a decision, one that would define everything that came after. I did not open my eyes. I let my body go slack. I let my breathing go shallow. I retreated back into the darkness not out of weakness, but because I was a strategist, an engineer. You do not fix a collapsing bridge by standing under it and screaming. You assess the damage, you gather your resources, then you rebuild or you demolish. "He is stabilizing," the doctor said after a few tense minutes. "Just a stress reaction. He is still in a deep coma. Hard to say at this point how much brain function remains." I heard Everard release a long, slow exhale. It sounded like relief. "So, what do we do now?" Everard asked. "We wait," Rochelle said. "We wait for him to die. And while we wait, we start clearing out the house. I don't want any of their junk cluttering up the sale." They stayed another 10 minutes. They discussed listing prices. They talked about gutting my kitchen to push up the sale value. They spoke about me as though I was already in the ground. Finally, I heard the click of her heels and the drag of his feet heading for the door. "Call us if anything changes," Everard told the nurse. "We will be at his house taking care of things." Taking care of things. That meant tearing my home apart. That meant terrorizing my confused wife. The door closed. Silence settled back into the room, but it was no longer the silence of death. It was the silence of the hunt. I waited. I counted seconds in my head, testing my mind. 1, 2, 3, sharp. The stroke had claimed my left side, but left my intelligence untouched. They had made a fatal miscalculation. Slowly, through gritted determination, I forced my right eye open. The room was dim-lit only by the glow of the machines. My right hand felt like a block of concrete, but I poured every ounce of will I had into it. "Move. Move, you stubborn old man." My fingers twitched. I clenched my teeth against the exhaustion pulling me back under, and I reached for the IV line in my arm. The tape bit at my skin. With a grunting effort, I ripped the needle free. Blood ran warm and sticky down my arm, but I did not care. I needed my phone. They had likely taken it, but I had a backup. I always had a backup. In the pocket of my trousers, hanging in the plastic bag on the hook by the door, was a prepaid flip phone. I kept it for emergencies, for secure dealings I did not want traced to my main accounts. I could not walk. My left leg was dead weight, but I could roll. I shifted my body and let gravity take me off the bed. I hit the floor with a heavy thud. Pain cracked through my hip, but I bit down and kept silent. Then I dragged myself across the cold linoleum floor inch by inch, hauling my dead weight with one good arm. 5 minutes to reach the door. 5 minutes of grinding, humiliating effort, but I got there. I reached up and fumbled with the plastic bag until my fingers closed around the hard rectangle of the phone. I pulled it out. Battery still good. My hand trembled as I dialed a number burned into my memory, the number of the one man in this world I trusted without reservation. A man who had stood beside me in the jungles of Vietnam and across the table in the fiercest corporate battles of my career. Ignatius Cobb, my lawyer, my brother in arms. The phone rang twice. "Hatch!" Ignatius's voice was gravelly and alert. It was 3 o'clock in the morning, and he answered like he had been sitting by the phone waiting. "Omega!" I rasped. My voice was barely a whisper, raw and thin, but the code word landed with the weight of a nuclear launch. A pause on the other end. A pause that told me Ignatius was already moving, already pulling files, already loading his weapon. "Omega confirmed," Ignatius said, his voice cold and precise. "Is Celestine safe?" "No," I wheezed. Hostiles in the perimeter. Everard Rochelle, they are moving on the house. They think I am a vegetable. Understood, Ignatius said. I am activating the extraction team. Do not move. Do not trust the hospital staff. I will have a private ambulance at the service entrance in 20 minutes. We are going dark, Corny. I hung up and let the phone drop to the floor. I lay there on the cold tiles, staring up at the ceiling. Tears pricked my eyes, but I would not let them fall. I had spent my whole life building a legacy for my son. I had constructed a fortress around my family, but somewhere along the way, I had made one fatal error. I had let the enemy walk in through the front door. Everard was no longer my son. He was a parasite, and Rochelle was the infection. They wanted a war. They wanted my money, my house, my life. They were about to find out why they called me Hatch. I closed my eyes and gathered my strength for the extraction. The old Corny, the loving father, the patient husband, he died on this floor tonight. The man lying on those tiles was something else entirely, and he was prepared to burn everything down. The service elevator doors parted with a soft hiss that sounded like a gunshot in the stillness of the hospital corridor. Two men in dark tactical scrubs stepped out. They carried themselves nothing like hospital porters. Every movement was precise, deliberate, the economy of soldiers. One checked a digital tablet while the other swept the hallway. "Mr. Hatch," the first man said quietly. Not a question, a statement. I nodded once. My neck was stiff, and each movement sent a jolt of electricity down my spine, but I pushed myself to sit upright. The paralysis on my left side was already beginning to recede, though my limbs still felt borrowed from somebody else. "We are moving now," the man said. They did not waste a second. No bedside manner, no gentle coaxing. They lifted me with practiced efficiency and transferred me into a heavy-duty wheelchair. One of them draped a dark blanket across my lap to cover the hospital gown, while the other pulled the last monitor leads free. The room went silent. The relentless beeping that had served as the soundtrack to my son's betrayal was gone. We moved. The wheels rolled soundlessly over the linoleum. We skirted the nurse's station. The night nurse was lost in a phone call, laughing at something on the other end, completely unaware that the patient in room 304 was gone. We reached the service bay in under 2 minutes. The cool night air struck my face, and I breathed it in greedily. It tasted of exhaust fumes and freedom. A black unmarked ambulance sat idling at the curb, rear doors already open. Ignatius was inside. He was perched on the bench seat, lit in the red glow of the equipment lights. He glanced at his watch, then at me. "You are 2 minutes late, Corny," he muttered, but the relief in his eyes gave him away. My throat was sandpaper dry. "Get me to Celestine." Ignatius leaned toward the driver. "Move." As the ambulance pulled away from the curb, a familiar set of headlights swung into the hospital parking lot. A dark blue sedan, Everard's car. He was coming back to sign the "Do Not Resuscitate" order. Coming back to make certain his father never opened his eyes again to contest the throne. He would walk into an empty room. He would find a bed with the sheets still warm and the IV dripping onto the floor. I shut my eyes and pictured the panic spreading across his face, not fear for my safety, but terror for his wallet. Too late. The king had left the building. The drive to my house took 20 minutes. 20 minutes of Ignatius briefing me on the legal landmines he had already laid down. But I could barely track the words. My mind held only one thing: my wife, Celestine, my queen. We stopped a block away. The Victorian mansion rose tall and dark against the night sky, a house I had purchased 30 years ago, a house I had restored with my own 2 hands. It was meant to be our sanctuary. Now it looked like a fortress flying the wrong flag. The second-floor windows blazed with light. A stereo thumped somewhere inside. They were celebrating. My son and his wife were throwing a party in my home while I was supposed to be dying in a hospital bed. The medical team helped me out of the ambulance. My left leg dragged, but I made it obey. I had a spare key hidden in a magnetic box tucked under the porch railing, an old habit from careful years. I prayed they had not thought to change the locks yet. My hands shook as I worked the box loose. The metal was cold and hard. I slid the key in. It turned. We stepped into the foyer without a sound. The air inside was thick with expensive cologne and takeout. My stomach turned. Everard's jacket hung on the coat rack. Rochelle's designer purse sat beside it. They had settled in like they already owned the place. I signaled the team to hold in the shadows. I needed Celestine first. I checked the master bedroom on the first floor. Empty. The bed was stripped to the mattress. They had already started erasing us. Cold panic climbed my chest. Where was she? I checked the guest room. Empty. The sunroom. Empty. Then I heard a soft whimpering drifting from the back of the house near the kitchen, a sound no husband should ever have to hear. I moved toward the pantry. It was a small windowless room we had always used for canned goods and cleaning supplies. It was never intended for people, cold in the winter, drafty. The door was latched shut from the outside. My hand shook as I slid the bolt back and pushed the door open. The kitchen light spilled inside, and what it revealed tore me apart. Celestine was huddled on a folding camping cot, wedged between shelves of pasta sauce and paper towels, wearing a thin nightgown stained with soup. Her silver hair, always so carefully braided, was matted and wild. She was shivering, arms wrapped tight around her knees, rocking. On the floor beside her sat a plastic cereal bowl filled with water and a half-eaten cracker on a paper towel. They had treated her like an animal. "Celestine," I choked out. She looked up. Her eyes were cloudy, veiled in the fog of her illness. For a moment, there was nothing, no recognition at all. Then a small flame flickered in the dark. "Corny," she whispered. Her voice was thin and brittle. "Is it time for church?" I dropped to my knees beside her, the pain in my hips screaming, and I pulled her close. She was ice cold. Her skin felt like paper. "No, baby. It is not time for church. It is time to go home." From upstairs, a burst of laughter rang out. Rochelle, loud and drunk. Glasses clinked. "Cheers to the new house." Everard's voice rolled through the floorboards. He was raising a toast to his inheritance, celebrating his victory, while his mother shivered on a cot in the pantry below him. The rage I had felt in that hospital was nothing compared to what rose in me now. This was not anger. This was cold, absolute resolve. Kneeling in that dark pantry with my trembling wife in my arms, I made a vow. I would not simply defeat them. I would obliterate them. I would strip away every comfort, every dollar, every last scrap of dignity they possessed until they truly understood the weight of what they had done. I got to my feet, drawing Celestine up with me. She was frail, light as a bird. "Come on, Celly," I said softly. "Where are we going? Corny?" she asked, peering around the small room. "Away from the monsters," I told her. I signaled the team. Two large men filled the kitchen doorway. They took one look, and their professional composure slipped. I watched the disgust move across their faces as their eyes landed on the cereal bowl on the floor. "Get her to the car," I said. They moved without hesitation, wrapping Celestine in a thermal blanket and taking her weight between them. I trailed them to the back door, but before I stepped out into the night, I stopped. I turned and looked back at my kitchen. I saw the marble countertops I had installed for Celestine's 60th birthday. I saw the walnut table where we had eaten thousands of meals. I saw the height chart carved into the doorframe, every notch marking Everard's climb from a toddler to a man. Above me, their footsteps moved across the floor, heavy with the confidence of people claiming what they had not earned. "Take a good look, Everard," I thought. "Enjoy the champagne. Enjoy the soft sheets and the warm fire, because winter is coming for you, son. And it is going to be longer and colder than anything you can imagine." I stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door shut behind me. The latch clicked like a gavel coming down. I climbed into the back of the ambulance beside Celestine. She was already asleep, worn out by everything they had put her through. I took her hand in mine. It was starting to warm up. "Drive," I told Ignatius. The vehicle rolled away into the dark, carrying us away from the house and everything it had become. I did not look back. The king was awake, and the war had just begun. I sat in the dim living room of the safe house, a tablet propped on my knee, its blue glow lighting my face like something risen from the grave. On the screen, a high-definition nightmare was unfolding in real time. I had installed hidden cameras in the molding of my Victorian home 3 months ago, the moment I caught Everard studying my silverware with the calculating eyes of a pawnbroker. I had never actually expected to use them. I never imagined I would sit here safe and dry, watching my only son tear apart the temple I had built for his mother. On the screen, Everard was sweating through his shirt. He was in my study, crouched before the wall safe I had concealed behind the portrait of my grandfather, gripping a heavy-duty industrial drill. His hands were shaking so badly, the bit kept skating across the steel face of the safe, screaming like a wounded animal. "Faster!" Rochelle shrieked from the doorway. She was pacing like something caged, yanking books off the shelves, shaking them for loose cash, then pitching them onto the floor. The hospital called 10 minutes ago. They know he is gone. If the police show up before we find those deeds, we are finished. I cannot go any faster. Everard snapped back, sweat dripping off his nose onto the carpet. This is reinforced steel. The old man built it himself. It is solid. He kept drilling. The metal groaned in protest. I watched from my chair without expression, taking a slow sip of water. I knew exactly how long it would take. I had designed that safe myself. He had roughly 4 more minutes before the locking mechanism gave way. And then, with a sharp crack, it did. Everard dropped the drill. The silence that followed was dense with greed. His hand trembling, he reached out and swung the heavy steel door open. Rochelle rushed to his side, her eyes enormous, lit with the hunger of a starving wolf. They expected stacks of cash, gold bars maybe, the bearer bonds from the municipal projects I had consulted on in the 90s. What they found was dust. The safe was empty except for a single index card folded neatly on the center shelf. Everard snatched it up, turned it over, hunting for a combination, a bank account, number, anything. All he found was my handwriting. "Read it," Rochelle demanded, her voice climbing. Everard read it aloud, his voice cracking apart word by word. "True wealth is found in the mind, son, not in the box." For a beat, neither of them moved. Then Rochelle came apart. The sound she made was raw, primal. She snatched a ceramic pitcher from the mantelpiece, one Celestine had hand-painted 40 years ago, and hurled it against the wall. It exploded into fragments. "He knew!" she shrieked. "That manipulative old man knew. He played us." She wheeled on Everard, striking his chest with both hands. "You said he was hoarding it here. You said he did not trust banks. You told me the millions were sitting in this house." "I did think they were here," Everard stammered, retreating from her. "He is old school. He always paid contractors in cash." "He is not just old school Everard." Rochelle spat the words at him, her face contorted. "Do you have any idea who your father actually is? Did you think he just fixed bridges? He holds the patents on the seismic dampeners installed in half the skyscrapers in Houston. He has royalties coming in from the structural reinforcement systems he designed in the 80s. He is not some retired engineer. He is the Iron King. He has millions sitting somewhere drawing interest while we drown in your gambling debts." I watched the screen, my face still, my chest hollow, so she knew. Rochelle had done her research. She knew about the patents. I had never spoken about the real scope of my work at home. To Everard, I had always been just a father who smelled like concrete and blueprints. I had wanted him to carve his own path, find his own hunger without the shadow of what I had built falling over him. I wanted him lean and driven. Instead, he was just greedy. And Rochelle was the one who had handed him the knife. "Where is it?" Everard shouted, driving his foot into my desk. "Where is the money?" "It is offshore, you fool," Rochelle hissed. "He must have moved it, or he put it in a trust for that senile wife of his. We have to find them. We have to get to him and make him sign it over before he rewrites the will." She went to work destroying the room in earnest. She ripped the drawers out of my desk and upended them, scattering my drafting tools across the floor. She swept my collection of antique drafting squares off the shelf. Then she went still. Her eyes snagged on the wedding photograph, hanging on the wall, Celestine and me on the church steps in 1973. Celestine looked so young, so full of light, holding my hand. Rochelle walked over to it. She stood and stared at Celestine's face for a long moment. Then she sneered. "Look at her," she said, her voice laced with poison. "That useless old woman. She does not even know her own name anymore, and she is sitting on a fortune. She is nothing but dead weight dragging everybody down." She reached up and tore the canvas from the frame. She ripped it down the center, splitting Celestine from me, then dropped the pieces onto the pile of debris on the floor. That was the moment. Up until then, I had been watching a crime. Now, I was watching a declaration of war. They had violated my home. They had insulted my wife. They had shredded the sanctuary of my memories. I set the tablet on the coffee table. My hands were steady and cold. I opened my laptop. The screen lit the room, illuminating the face of a man with nothing left to give in the way of mercy. I logged into the secure banking portal, familiar interface, clean, efficient. I navigated to the sub-accounts, the ones I had quietly established 5 years ago, when Everard said he wanted to build his own firm. I had seeded them without fanfare, enough capital to give him a foundation, a safety net. I looked at the balance, lower than it should have been. He had been draining it steadily, feeding the casinos and Rochelle's taste for designer, everything most likely. But there was still enough to keep them breathing. Enough for gas, food, the hotel room they would need once the eviction notice landed. I moved the cursor over the button, marked suspend all activity. I glanced back at the tablet. Everard was slumped in my leather chair, head buried in his hands. Rochelle was still at it, kicking through the wreckage she had made, screaming about how unfair it all was, how she deserved better. She deserved nothing, and he deserved a lesson. I did not hesitate. I clicked. A small window opened. Confirm suspension of all supplementary cards and joint assets associated with Everard Hatch. I clicked yes. Status updated. Frozen. I closed the laptop. The only light remaining came from the tablet where my son and his wife were still tearing through a house that was no longer theirs, hunting for money that no longer existed. I leaned back in the chair. The silence of the safe house pressed in around me, but it was clean silence. It carried no smell of betrayal. Go ahead, Everard, I whispered to the empty room. Try to buy dinner tonight. Try to fill your tank. You wanted to be the man of the house. You wanted my legacy. Well, you just got it. You got the struggle. You got the hunger. Welcome to the real world, son. Let us see how long you last in it. Everard sat at the head of the table, at the ivory table, the most expensive steakhouse in the city, surrounded by 5 of his so-called friends. These were men in shiny suits who laughed too loudly at jokes that did not land sharks who had picked up the scent of blood. Everard took them for admirers. He lifted a glass of 30-year-old scotch toward the chandelier light. To the future, Everard announced, his voice rolling over the soft piano music. To the Hatch legacy finally in the right hands. They cheered, crystal glasses ringing out, ordering Wagyu beef and lobster towers, like the bill was someone else's problem. I watched the transaction alert appear on my laptop screen back at the safe house. Authorization request $5,400. I took a sip of tea and clicked deny. Back in the restaurant, the mood shifted in an instant. The waiter returned to the table, not with a receipt to sign, but with the card pinched between 2 fingers, like something he had found on the floor. Sir, the card has been declined. Everard laughed a tight, brittle sound. Run it again. It is a black card. It does not get declined. It has been declined twice, sir, the waiter said, his voice carrying across the now quiet dining room. Do you have another form of payment? The sharks stopped eating. They glanced at Everard, then at one another. A thick wave of second-hand embarrassment settled over the table. Everard dug through his wallet and produced the corporate card for his architecture firm. Try this one, he snapped. The waiter took it and returned 2 minutes later. Also declined, sir. The bank has flagged it for suspicious activity. I will need to keep the card. The table went silent as a grave. Everard flushed red, then purple. This is a mistake, he barked, shoving back his chair so hard it toppled over. My father is Cornelius Hatch. Do you know who I am? The waiter stepped aside for the manager, who was already approaching with 2 large security guards in tow. I do not care who your father is, sir, the manager said. You have consumed $5,000 worth of food. Pay the bill, or we involve the police. Everard patted his jacket pockets. He looked around the table at his friends. Guys, I must have triggered a fraud alert moving some assets around. Can one of you cover this? I will wire you double tomorrow. The sharks suddenly became fascinated with their own shoes. One checked his watch. Another recalled an early meeting. They tossed just enough cash to cover their own drinks and scattered like roaches when the lights flick on, leaving Everard alone with the bill and his humiliation. He had to leave the Omega watch, the one I gave him for graduation, as collateral. When he walked out into the cold night air, he was not a king. He was a pauper in a borrowed suit. The humiliation at the restaurant was only the appetizer. The main course was waiting at his office. Everard drove his leased Cadillac like a man possessed, racing toward the glass and steel tower that housed EH Architecture. He needed cash, specifically the emergency operating fund he believed only he could access. He parked illegally at the curb and sprinted into the lobby, blowing past the night watchman. He took the elevator to the 20th floor, jabbing the button with a trembling finger. He burst through his office door breathless and soaked in sweat. He dropped into his chair and pulled up the firm's banking portal. Access denied. He typed the password again. Access denied. User account suspended. He drove his fist into the keyboard. What is going on? He screamed at the empty room. He grabbed the landline to make a call. Dead. Then the office door swung open. He spun around expecting security. He found Ignatius Cobb instead. My lawyer stood in the doorway wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than Everard's car still, and immovable like a monument to judgment. "What are you doing here?" Everard demanded, his voice splitting. "Get out of my office." "It is not your office anymore," Ignatius said, stepping calmly into the room. He set a single sheet of paper on the desk. "Notice of suspension, effective immediately." "Who authorized this?" Everard snatched up the paper. "The board loves me. I built this firm." "You built nothing," Ignatius replied, his voice flat and cold as iron. "This firm was funded by a silent angel investor who holds 60% of the voting shares. Did you never stop to wonder who kept pulling you back from the edge every time a project went over budget? Everard went still. "No, it cannot be." "It is," Ignatius confirmed. "Your father, Cornelius Hatch, is the majority shareholder. As his legal proxy, I am executing a vote of no confidence. You are being removed for financial impropriety and gross incompetence. Security is on its way to escort you out. You have 5 minutes to collect your personal belongings. Leave the laptop and the phone, they are company property." Everard sank back into the chair. The full weight of it landed on him like a collapsing beam. The father he had mocked, the father he had tried to have killed, had owned him the entire time. He had been playing CEO in a sandbox I built for him, and I had just taken away the shovel. He was standing on the sidewalk holding a cardboard box, a stapler, and a framed photo of himself when his personal phone rang. It was Rochelle. He answered, hoping for a lifeline, hoping she had turned up the deeds or moved some jewelry. Instead, he got a banshee. "What did you do, Everard? What did you do?" "Calm down," he shouted, his nerves stripped raw. "I just lost the firm. Dad owns it. He fired me." "I do not care about your stupid firm," Rochelle screamed. "The realtor just called. The open house is canceled. The buyers pulled their offers. Someone filed a lien on the property, Everard, a massive lien. There is a notice of dispute filed with the county clerk. We cannot sell the house. We cannot even refinance it. It is radioactive." Everard let the box drop. The stapler cracked against the concrete. "He froze my accounts, too," he whispered. "My cards are dead." Rochelle's scream curdled into a sob of pure fury. "You useless idiot! You told me he was handled. You told me he was a vegetable. How is a man in a coma destroying our lives?" "He is not in a coma," Everard said, the truth finally breaking through. "He is awake, and he is coming for us." The line went dead. Everard stood alone on that street corner. No job, no money, no house to sell. And for the first time in his life, the realization settled in that he had no father left to bail him out. The city lights smeared through his tears, not grief, but terror. He was beginning to understand what it felt like to have nothing at all. The silence of the safe house held for 3 days before it was broken, not by a phone call, but by a steady rhythmic pounding against the reinforced steel door. I was settled in the armchair by the window, Celestine asleep in the room next door, getting the first real rest she had known in years. I pulled up the security monitor. It was them. Everard and Rochelle stood on the front porch, but they bore no resemblance to the screaming wrecks who had called threatening me over the phone. They had changed costumes. Everard wore a modest sweater instead of his flashy suits. Rochelle had scrubbed off her heavy makeup and was in a plain dress. And most manipulatively of all, they had brought Teddy Rochelle's 6-year-old son from her first marriage. They were playing the family card. I watched them on the monitor. Everard found the camera hidden in the doorbell and looked directly at it, not with rage, but with a carefully rehearsed expression of concern. "Dad," he called out, his voice muffled by the heavy door. "We know you are in there. Please open up. We just want to talk. We are worried about you." Bile climbed my throat. Worried. They were worried about their inheritance, not me. They had hired a private investigator. I had clocked the man parked down the street the day before to run me to ground. Now that threats and theft had failed, they had fallen back on the oldest weapon available to people like them, emotional blackmail. I looked toward the room where Celestine was sleeping. She was fragile. If she saw them, she would want to open the door. Her heart had no memory of their cruelty, only of their faces. I had a choice to make. I could leave the door bolted, call the police, and have them dragged off for harassment. But that would only postpone things. They would keep coming. They would drag this into court, claiming I was mentally unfit and holding my wife against her will. No, if I wanted this finished, I had to let them in. I had to let them believe they had won. I went to the hallway mirror. I pulled my hair loose, tugging out tufts of gray to look unkempt. I left my shirt unbuttoned so it hung slack on my frame. I removed my glasses to make my eyes appear unfocused and vague. I needed to become the man they had decided I was, the confused, senile old man who had run away out of fear, not fury. I unlocked the deadbolts one by one, making sure my hands shook visibly as I drew the door open. "Dad!" Everard exhaled, lurching forward to wrap his arms around me. It was a hug that felt like a pair of handcuffs. "Oh, thank God. We have been looking everywhere for you." I pulled back, blinking fast, my gaze drifting past him as though I were tracking shadows no one else could see. "The house," I mumbled, my voice catching. "The house was too loud, Everard. The walls were screaming. I had to leave. Had to." Everard shot a quick look at Rochelle. I caught the flash of triumph between them. They bought it. They were convinced the stroke had finally short-circuited me, that the paranoia had taken hold. "It is okay," Rochelle said, stepping in closer, her tone laced with a cloying sweetness. "We are here now. We will make the screaming stop. Look, Teddy is here to see you." She nudged the boy forward. He looked frightened and uncertain, gripping a toy truck with both hands. "Hi, Grandpa Corny," he whispered. My chest cracked open for that child. He was blameless in all of this, a prop in their little theater production. I laid my hand gently on his head. "Hello, son." "Where is Mom?" Everard asked, craning past me to look into the apartment. "She is sleeping," I said. "She was worn out. The ghosts kept waking her." "Ghosts?" Everard repeated. He settled a hand on my shoulder, a gesture dressed up as comfort, but carrying the full weight of ownership. "Dad, there are no ghosts. You are confused. It is the stroke. You are not well." Maybe I said, letting my shoulders slump. Maybe I'm not. I just wanted quiet. "We can help with that," Rochelle said. "We can take you somewhere quiet, somewhere safe. We found a place, Dad. A beautiful place with doctors and nurses who can help you and Mom feel better. A nursing home. The trap was sprung. I let fear seep across my face. I do not want to go to a hospital." "Not a hospital," Rochelle corrected quick as a reflex. "A community, a home. Just for a little while, just until you get your strength back. Then you can come back to your house." Lies. The moment I walked through those doors, I would never walk back out. But I needed them to commit the crime. I needed them to sign the admission papers using the forged power of attorney. I needed tangible proof that they were taking us against our will. I looked at Everard, my son, the boy I had once carried on my shoulders. I gave him one last chance to step back from the edge. "Everard," I asked, my voice clear for just a heartbeat. "Do you promise you will take care of us?" He held my gaze. He did not flinch. "I promise, Dad, we will take care of everything." He was signing his own warrant. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay, we will go." Everard let out a long breath he had been holding somewhere deep. "Good. That is good. Let us get Mom. We have a car waiting." I went into the bedroom and woke Celestine. She smiled the moment she saw me. "Hey, handsome," she said. "Is the coffee ready?" "We are going for a ride, Celly," I told her, easing her upright. "Everard is here." "Everard." She clapped her hands, delighted. "Is he staying for dinner?" "Something like that," I said. I packed a small bag, moving with deliberate slowness, playing every inch of the part. I made sure my tablet and the main prepaid flip phone stayed hidden beneath the floorboards in the closet. I brought only the dummy phone they already knew about. As we made our way out to their vehicle, a dented sedan they had likely rented to look humble, I noticed Rochelle hammering out texts on her phone. She was almost certainly messaging the forger or the facility, letting them know the package was secured. They helped us into the back seat. Everard dropped into the driver's seat and found me in the rearview mirror. "You made the right choice, Dad," he said. I turned my eyes to the window and watched the city slide past. I said nothing. I already knew our destination. I had traced their internet searches. Shady Grove. Extended care, a state-funded warehouse for the destitute and the discarded on the far edge of town. A place with a documented history of neglect citations and abuse complaints. That was where they were delivering the man who had shaped half this city's skyline. The drive was long and airless. Celestine drifted off her head, resting on my shoulder. I held her hand, feeling the delicate bones beneath the skin. I would endure whatever came next for her. I would walk into hell itself if it meant dragging those devils into the light. When the vehicle finally slowed, the world outside had transformed. The trimmed hedges and tidy lawns of the suburbs had given way to cracked asphalt and chain-link fencing. We rolled to a stop in front of a gray concrete structure that resembled a detention facility far more than a care home. "We are here," Rochelle announced, her brightness entirely manufactured. I looked up at the sign. Shady Grove Extended Care. The letters were peeling. Iron bars crossed every window. I climbed out of the vehicle, performing confusion and fright. "This does not look like a home, Everard." "It is just the outside, Dad." Everard said, his grip firm on my arm. "Inside, it is very nice." "Come on." They marched us to the front desk. The smell reached me before anything else. Urine bleach and stale cabbage. The stench of despair. A heavy-set woman in a stained uniform peered up at us from behind plexiglass. "Hatch admission," she barked. "Yes," Rochelle said, stepping forward and producing a folder from her bag. "I have the paperwork. I am the power of attorney." She signed. I watched the pen move across the page. She was using the forged documents. She was committing a felony in plain sight right in front of me. "Take them to Ward C," the woman said, sliding 2 plastic wristbands across the counter. Ward C, the dementia ward, the lockdown unit. They walked us down a long corridor. We passed rooms with 4 beds crammed wall to wall. Elderly residents sat staring at flickering televisions with empty eyes. Moans seeped out from behind closed doors. "This is it," Everard said, halting in front of room 302. It was a cramped room with 2 narrow cots and 1 window that faced a bare brick wall. "Get settled in," Dad Rochelle said. "We will bring your things later." She did not mean a word of it. They were never coming back. I turned to Everard. "When will you visit?" "Soon, Dad, soon." He would not look me in the eye. They turned for the door. Rochelle paused on the threshold. "Oh, corny," she said, dropping the performance for just a moment. Her voice went cold, flat, and satisfied. "Don't wait up." The door clicked shut. The lock turned from the outside. We were prisoners. Celestine sat at the edge of the cot, taking in the bleak little room. "Corny," she said, her voice unsteady. "I do not like this hotel." I sat down beside her and put my arm around her shoulders. "It is okay, baby. We are not staying." I found the camera mounted in the corner of the ceiling. It was a decoy, a hollow plastic dome installed to reassure visiting families. But I had something far better. I reached into my sock and drew out a micro GPS tracker no bigger than a button. I pressed the activation sequence. Ignatius was watching. The clock had started. They believed they had sealed us inside a concrete tomb. But what they had actually done was lock themselves in a cage with a lion, and the lion was starving for justice. The tires of the rented vehicle ground over broken glass and gravel as we turned off the main highway. I sat in the back seat with Celestine's hand in mine, feeling the tremor of her fear move through her thin bones. Everard was driving his knuckles pale against the steering wheel eyes, flicking to the rearview mirror every few seconds to check on me. He was searching for the father. He thought he knew the bewildered invalid who needed protecting. He did not see the wolf riding in the back seat, counting streetlights and committing the route to memory. We had left the well-kept lawns of our historic district far behind. Outside, the landscape had curdled into a stretch of shuttered warehouses, liquor stores caged behind iron bars, and pawn shops. This was the city's margin, the place where they pushed everything they preferred not to see. I knew this ground. I had engineered the structural supports for the overpass looming above us, throwing its long shadow across the neighborhood below. This was the bottoms, and buried somewhere in this concrete wasteland was a place I knew only by its reputation. Shady Grove. The name was a bitter joke. It was a state-funded warehouse for the indigent, the forgotten, and the unwanted. The place you sent people when you wanted them to disappear quietly and cheaply. "Is this the place, Everard?" I asked, letting my voice quiver with feigned senile dread. "It looks dark, son." "It is just the area," Dad Everard replied, his voice wound tight. "Once we get inside, it is very nice. They have a garden." He was lying through every tooth in his head. There was no garden. There was only a pothole-riddled parking lot and a dumpster heaped with overflow trash. Rochelle turned around from the front seat, her face flushed and bright with excitement. "Stop complaining, Corny. You are lucky we found a bed for you at all. Most places keep a waiting list for people in your condition." My condition. My condition was that I was a multimillionaire being taken prisoner by my own blood. But I held my tongue, letting my head loll against the window. We pulled up to the main entrance. The building was a gray concrete slab, stained dark by years of grime and indifference. The sign above the door was missing a letter, so it read, Shady Garv. Everard cut the engine. For a moment, he just sat there, both hands locked on the wheel. I watched his shoulders rise and fall. Was that guilt? Was that doubt? Get them out. Rochelle snapped, pushing her door open. We have a schedule, Everard. The notary is meeting us at the bank in an hour. Everard swallowed and nodded. He climbed out and hauled the side door open. Come on, Dad. Let us get you settled in. I stepped down onto the fractured pavement, my legs working in a slow, labored shuffle. I guided Celestine out after me. She took one look at the gray block of a building and made a small, wounded sound. Corny, I do not want to go in there, she whispered. It smells like the sad place. It is okay, Celly, I murmured against her ear. Just a little while. Stay right beside me. We moved through the automatic doors which juddered and groaned on their tracks as they parted. The smell struck us the moment we crossed the threshold. It was not so much a scent as a physical barrier, stale urine, boiled cabbage, industrial bleach, and beneath all of it, the deep rotting undertone of untreated wounds, the odor of human suffering. The lobby was dim lit by flickering fluorescent tubes that buzzed like angry hornets. The floor was scuffed linoleum tacky against the sole. In the far corner, an old man in a wheelchair sat facing the wall, muttering to no one, his hospital gown stained and gaping at the back. No receptionist rose to meet us with a smile. There was only a grease-smeared glass partition, behind which a heavy-set woman with a worn-out face worked her gum with aggressive indifference. Hatch admission, Rochelle announced, slapping a manila folder onto the counter. The woman did not bother to look up. Paperwork. Rochelle slid the forged documents through the slot. I watched her hand. It did not waver once. She had rehearsed this. She was committing fraud, kidnapping, and elder abuse without so much as a flicker of hesitation. Ward C. The woman grunted, stamping a form. Room 12, down the hall, left past the cafeteria. Ward C. I understood exactly what that meant. The lockdown unit. The ward for dementia patients and those deemed flight risks, where the doors were secured from the outside. We set off down the long corridor. The walls were painted a dispiriting shade of beige, peeling away in long, curling strips like dead skin. We passed rooms where 4 or 5 beds were jammed together, divided only by thin curtains. I heard coughing. I heard weeping. I saw a woman lying in her own waste, pressing a call button that nobody answered. This was my son's design for me. This was the dividend on 40 years of fatherhood. We arrived at room 12. It was a bare box containing 2 metal cots and 1 high window cross-hatched with wire mesh. No privacy curtain, no bathroom, only a commode wedged in the corner. It is cozy, Rochelle said, glancing around with a thin sneer. Everard stayed in the doorway and refused to step inside. He had gone pale. We need your personal effects. The woman from the front desk materialized behind us, clutching a plastic bin. No outside items permitted in Ward C. Phones, wallets, jewelry. Hand them over. It is policy, Dad, Everard said, his voice drained of all substance. For your safety. I studied his face. I looked deep into his eyes, searching for some remnant of the boy who used to weep over a scraped knee. There was nothing there, only a hollow man under the thumb of a greedy woman. I reached into my pocket and produced the decoy wallet I had prepared. It held $50 and an expired driver's license. I pressed it into Everard's hand. Take care of it, son, I said. His hand trembled as he took it. I will, Dad. And the phone Rochelle demanded, palm extended. I handed her the old flip phone I had been carrying. She snatched it with a satisfied smile. Good, she said, dropping it into the bin. You will not be needing this anymore. You have us to handle your calls now. She leaned in toward me. Her perfume was suffocating, layered thick enough to mask the facility's stench. She dropped her voice to where only I could hear it. Make yourself comfortable, corny, she hissed, because you are never leaving. You are going to rot in this place until you die, you stubborn old black man. And when you are gone, I am going to burn every photograph of you and turn your precious house into a parking lot. The racial slur hung in the air between us, toxic and deliberate. She had finally spoken the thing she had been carrying for 10 years. It was not only that I stood between her and the money, she despised me for who I was. She turned to go, seizing Everard by the arm. Let us go. We have money to spend. Wait, Celestine cried out, lurching toward Everard. Son, do not leave us here. I am frightened. She caught hold of Everard's sleeve. Her grip was faint and trembling. Let go of him, Rochelle snapped. An orderly filled the doorway. He was a big man, thick through the arms, face set in the expression of permanent contempt. His name tag read, Ox. Trouble here? Ox grunted. She is grabbing me, Rochelle said, pivoting instantly into the victim. The old woman is being aggressive. Ox moved forward. He did not ask a single question. He made no attempt to calm the situation. He simply acted. He brought his heavy hand around and shoved Celestine backward. It was not a gentle nudge. It was a hard, deliberate push. Celestine, frail and bewildered, lost her footing. She stumbled back, arms wheeling, and met the hard linoleum floor with a sickening crack. She cried out, a sound of raw pain and terror clutching at her hip. That was the moment everything stopped. The sound of my wife hitting that floor tore through the mask I had been wearing for days. The confused old man evaporated. The stroke victim ceased to exist. In his place, Cornelius Hatch, the structural engineer who had walked steel girders in the gale force winds, the Vietnam veteran who had come back from the jungle, stood up straight. My hands did not shake. My legs did not falter. I brought my spine to its full 6'2" height, my eyes fixed on Ox. "Hey, old man, sit down." Ox snarled, advancing on me and reaching for the restraints hanging from his belt. He made the mistake of sizing me up as prey. He reached for my shoulder. I did not block him. I moved into his space, collapsing the distance between us. My left hand, the one I had been performing as paralyzed, snapped up and clamped onto his wrist. I pressed into the radial nerve. Ox's eyes went wide with shock. Before any sound could leave him, I stepped behind him and used his own momentum as a lever. I swept the back of his knee and he buckled. I drove his face into the wall with controlled, measured force. Not enough to kill him, enough to extinguish his lights. He crumpled to the floor unconscious in 3 seconds flat. I stood over him and straightened my cuffs. I checked my pulse. Steady. I turned around. Everard and Rochelle were frozen in the doorway, mouths open, eyes stretched wide. They looked like people confronting something they were certain could not exist. Corny Rochelle breathed. Her voice had shrunk to a terrified squeak. I crossed to Celestine. I dropped to one knee without any effort at all, my joints moving cleanly, and helped her sit up. "Are you hurt, baby?" I asked quietly, running my hands over her carefully. "I think I am all right, Corny," she said, holding on to me. "That man was mean. He will not trouble you again, I promised." I rose and turned back to face my son. The silence in that room pressed down like a physical weight. Everard was retreating, both hands lifted in a feeble gesture of surrender. "Dad," he stammered. "Dad, you are okay." I took a step toward him. The floor groaned beneath me. I was no ghost. I was a reckoning. "I am not just okay, Everard." I said, my voice low and full, filling every corner of the room. "I am awake. Dad, we did not know." Rochelle began to fabricate, her eyes already sliding toward the exit. "Shut up," I said. The words landed like a rifle shot. Rochelle flinched and went silent. I looked at Everard. I looked at the man who had just watched his mother get knocked to the floor and had not moved a muscle. "You believed I was weak," I said, walking toward him until his back found the doorframe. "You believed I was feeble. You thought you could drop me in a hole and stroll away with everything I built." "Dad, please." Everard whimpered, tears cutting down his face. I reached out and took hold of his collar. I pulled him in close enough that he could breathe the absence of fear on me. "You forgot who raised you," I said quietly. "You forgot that before I was an old man, I was a warrior, and you just picked a fight with the wrong soldier." Sirens began to rise in the distance. Ignatius. He had been tracking the GPS. What comes next revealed something about my own son that I could never have prepared myself to face, and what I chose to do with that knowledge would cost me more than I ever expected. Let me ask you this: if someone you raised and loved turned against you in the worst possible way, would you confront them in the moment, or would you stay quiet and let your plan do the talking? He had picked up the audio from the bug I had planted on myself. The cavalry was on its way. I released Everard and he sagged against the wall, sliding down until he was sitting on the grimy floor. "Up you get," I told Celestine, drawing her to her feet. "Our ride is here." I looked at Rochelle, who was shaking in the corner, clutching her designer bag as though it were a shield. "You said you wanted to clear out the house, Rochelle," I said, my voice cold enough to frost glass. "Well, start running, because by the time I'm finished with you, the only thing you will own is the jumpsuit the state hands you." I walked out of that room, holding my wife's hand. stepping over the unconscious orderly, leaving my son and his wife buried in the rubble of their own greed. The patriarch had returned, and mercy was not part of the agenda. Those sirens were the finest music I had ever heard, cutting through the stale air of Shady Grove, extended care like a blade. 2 uniformed officers came through the door, with weapons drawn, but pointed low, trailed by a cluster of bewildered orderlies. Rochelle did not miss a beat. She threw herself at the nearest officer, Oscar-worthy tears pouring down her face. "Officer, thank God you are here," she shrieked, jabbing a trembling finger in my direction. "My father-in-law has dementia, and he is violent. He just attacked this poor orderly for absolutely no reason. Look at him. He is dangerous." Ox was groaning on the floor, hand pressed to his face, blood seeping from his nose. And I understood how this scene read. A 6'2" black man standing over a fallen white man inside a state facility. "Officer," she pressed on, fishing the crumpled papers from her purse. "I have the power of attorney right here. I am his legal guardian. He needs to be restrained immediately. He needs to be sedated for his own safety." The officer glanced at Ox, then at me, and ordered me to step away from the wall and keep my hands where he could see them. I moved slowly and deliberately, letting Rochelle dig her hole deeper. "He has been threatening us all day," she insisted, growing bolder with the officer's attention, claiming I was paranoid that I believed they were stealing my money, pleading with them to transfer me to the psychiatric ward. Everard stood in the corner, pale and perspiring, nodding along with every word of her lies. But his eyes kept moving around the room, hunting for an exit, because something had unsettled him. His father did not simply shake off a stroke and come up swinging like a man half his age. The officer's hand moved toward his handcuffs, noting that if the paperwork held up, he would have to take me into custody. Rochelle's lips curved into a small, mean smile. She thought she had won. She thought she was moments away from making me disappear legally and for good. That was when the atmosphere in the room shifted not from any sound, but from a presence. A man in a tailored 3-piece suit came through the doorway, moving past the confused facility staff, with the unhurried authority of someone who owned whatever ground he stood on, carrying a leather briefcase and a tablet. Ignatius Cobb. Officer put the cuffs away. Ignatius said, his voice deep and resonant, commanding instant attention. "Unless you plan on using them on the woman standing beside you." The officer lowered his hand and asked who he was. "I am Cornelius Hatch's attorney," Ignatius replied, stepping between me and the police. "And I am here to stop you from becoming an accessory to a kidnapping." Kidnapping. Rochelle scoffed, her voice cracking at the edges, insisting it was absurd and that she had the papers. "Papers forged 3 days ago," Ignatius answered, unhurried, drawing a thick file from his briefcase. "These are Mr. Hatch's actual medical records examined this very morning by an independent neurologist. As you will see, his cognitive function is entirely intact. He has no history of dementia. He suffered a minor stroke from which he has made a complete recovery. He is as sharp as you or I, officer, possibly sharper than the people accusing him." The officer took the file and began leafing through it while Rochelle went white, shrieking that it was fabricated and that I had paid off a doctor. "Did he?" Ignatius said, lifting the tablet. "And did he also pay her to rehearse his signature at her kitchen counter last Tuesday?" He pressed play and turned the screen to face the officers, an Everard crisp, unmistakable footage from the hidden camera I had installed in my own kitchen, showing Rochelle seated at the island, surrounded by scraps of paper, gripping my favorite fountain pen, signing Reginald Hatch over and over, murmuring that practice makes perfect. The real Rochelle in the room gasped and clutched her chest. Everard stared at the screen jaw hanging open. "That is not everything," Ignatius said, swiping to the next clip, a snippet of audio in which my son's own voice discussed how to dispose of his parents' bodies if the nursing home scheme fell apart. The officer looked up from the tablet, his expression hardened. He looked at Rochelle, then at Everard, and told her to step away from me. "No." Rochelle backed up, shaking her head, insisting it was a trick, a deep fake. But the officer told her she was under arrest for fraud and elder abuse. Everard did not move. He did not look at the police or at his wife. He looked at me for what felt like the first time in his life he actually saw me. Not the ATM machine he had been drawing from for years, not the frail old man he had written off as easy prey, but the man who had endured wars, military and corporate both, the man who had assembled a fortune from nothing, the father who had loved him enough to let him stumble, but who valued himself enough to hold the line against betrayal. Dad, he whispered the word dropping from his mouth like a stone. You set us up. I stepped forward and looked down at my son, who appeared diminished and hollow, a child wearing a man's suit. I did not set you up, Everard, I said, my voice level and quiet. I just switched the lights on. You did the rest. You let us bring you here, he said, tears welling. You let us think we had won. Why would you do that? Because I needed to know, I said. I needed to know whether there was anything of my son left inside you, any part that would hesitate, any part that would protect his mother. I glanced at Celestine, who was watching us with wide, frightened eyes, holding tight to Ignatius's arm. I gave you every chance, Everard. I handed you the keys to everything I built, and you tried to enter me under the floorboards. Everard dropped to his knees, not in remorse, but in the total collapse of the world. He thought he controlled sobbing and offering apologies. I looked at him cold and unmoved. Sorry is for accidents, Everard, I said, and turned my back on him. This was deliberate. You just escaped the consequences for now. Ignatius signaled the officers to remove them from my sight. As they hauled a screaming Rochelle and a weeping Everard out of the room, I felt something lift from my chest. Not joy, something heavier and quieter than that. The deep, settled satisfaction of a thing fully done. The patriarch was awake. The traitors were finished. But the night still had one more act. The walk of shame out of the precinct was nothing set against the homecoming that waited for my son and his wife. They had been released pending a further hearing, a temporary reprieve granted only because the machinery of justice turned slowly, but they came back to a house that was no longer a home. It was a monument to everything they had ruined. From where I sat in a rented sedan parked down the street, I watched them drag themselves up the driveway. Everard looked like a man who had absorbed 10 rounds from a heavyweight. His suit was creased, his tie gone, his posture broken, clean through. Rochelle trailed a step behind him, no longer the imperious queen of the castle, but a cornered animal casting around for somewhere to go. They had barely turned the key in the front door when the first domino of their collapse fell. A black SUV with tinted windows screeched to the curb and blocked the driveway. 2 men climbed out. They did not carry themselves like lawyers or detectives. They wore leather jackets and held baseball bats with the loose, practiced ease of men who use them professionally. I knew exactly what they were. They were the collection arm of the underworld, the muscle dispatched by the loan sharks Everard had borrowed from to keep his gambling addiction fed. Ignatius had warned me they were circling, but seeing them in person sent a cold spike of adrenaline straight through me. Everard froze on the porch key, half-turned in the lock. "Hey!" One of the men called out a gravelly bark that rolled down the quiet suburban street. "Hatch, you owe Mr. Zenko a lot of money, and Mr. Zenko is tired of waiting." Everard tried to stammer out an excuse to plead for more time, but these men had not come for conversation. They were there to deliver a message. The first man swung his bat. It connected with the taillight of Everard's leased Cadillac with a sharp crunch of plastic and glass. The second went for the windshield. Smash! The safety glass fractured into 1,000 glittering shards. Smash, smash, smash. They worked through the car with methodical violence, hammering the metal until it resembled a crumpled soda can. It was the swift, systematic demolition of the one status symbol Everard had left. Rochelle screamed, pressing both hands to her mouth, backing against the front door, as though she could dissolve through the wood. The leader of the two walked up the driveway, crunching over the broken glass. He came to a stop at the foot of the porch steps and leveled the bat at Everard. 48 hours, he said, his voice quiet and lethal. 48 hours to pay in full. Or next time, we do not hit the car, we hit the wife. They climbed back into the SUV and pulled away, leaving nothing behind but silence and wreckage. Everard sagged against the doorframe, sliding down until he hit the porch floor. He dropped his face into his hands and began to sob. It was a pitiful sound. The sound of a man who has realized the walls are not just closing in, they are already crushing him. Back inside the house, the panic took over. I had tapped into the internal security system's microphone so I could hear every desperate word. They were in the kitchen pacing like trapped animals. "What are we going to do?" Everard Rochelle shrieked, her voice tipping toward hysteria. "They are going to kill me. You heard him. They are going to break my legs. We have no money." Everard mumbled, his gaze fixed on the marble countertop. "Dad froze the accounts. The firm let me go. I have nothing." Think Rochelle screamed, grabbing him by the shoulders and shaking him hard. "Think, you idiot. There has to be something. The jewelry is gone. The accounts are locked. What is left? Everard's eyes moved around the kitchen, drifting over the high-end appliances, the custom cabinetry, the crown molding I had fitted by hand 20 years ago. His gaze finally settled on the insurance papers, still pinned to the corkboard beside the refrigerator. A policy I had taken out years earlier to protect the family asset. A policy that carried a $2 million payout in the event of a total loss. The house, he whispered. The house is insured. Rochelle stopped shaking him. She studied the papers, then looked back at him, her eyes narrowing into something cold and calculating. It is still in Corny's name, she said slowly. But you are the beneficiary on the policy. If the house is gone, if it burns to the ground while he is supposedly missing or confined in a hospital, the payout comes to us. It is, Arson Everard said, his voice unsteady. It is a felony. So is attempted murder. Rochelle shot back her voice, dropping to a venomous whisper. And we are already facing charges for that. What is one more crime if it keeps us alive? We take the money we pay Zenko. We leave the country. It is the only exit we have. Everard, burn it down. I listened from the car, my heart turning to stone in my chest. I had hoped he would run. I had hoped he would walk into a police station on his own. I had hoped to find some last sliver of decency in him. But desperation is a powerful drug, and my son was far gone on it. He got to his feet. I will do it, he said. Tonight. Night settled heavy and moonless over the neighborhood. The streetlights hummed, throwing long pools of yellow light across the pavement. I sat in the back of a Lincoln Town car, Ignatius beside me. We were parked 2 houses down, cloaked in shadow. I held a high-definition camera with a telephoto lens. My fingers were rigid not from age, but from the effort of restraining myself from throwing the door open and stopping him. But I could not stop him. I had to let him walk across that final line. If I stepped in now, I might save the house, but I would lose the justice. He had to choose his own fate. At 2 o'clock in the morning, the side door of the house swung open. Everard stepped out. He was dressed entirely in black, a hoodie pulled low over his face. In his hand, he carried a red plastic gasoline can, the one I kept for the lawnmower. He moved carefully, keeping to the shadows of the azalea bushes I had planted for Celestine on our 10th anniversary. He looked like a thief prowling through his own home. He circled the perimeter, pouring accelerant along the foundation, splashing it up onto the wooden siding of the porch. I watched through the camera lens, zooming in, until his face filled the frame. He was crying. Tears ran down his cheeks, mingling with the sweat of fear. He was terrified, and still he kept pouring. He reached the back deck, the place where we had thrown 4th of July barbecues, where he had first learned to grill a burger, where we had sat together and watched the sunset more times than I could count. He soaked the wooden planks, drowning the memories in gasoline. My hand trembled. The camera image shook. Steady, Corny Ignatius murmured, resting a hand on my arm. Let him finish. It felt like watching him pour fuel onto my own skin. That house was not just timber and brick. It was the physical shape of everything I had ever loved about my family. It was the shelter I had spent my life building to keep them safe. And now, the boy I had built it for was about to reduce it to cinders. Everard stepped back onto the lawn. He tossed the empty can into the bushes. He reached into his pocket and produced a book of matches. He struck one. The flame surged bright and sudden in the darkness, a tiny orange star of destruction. He held it aloft, his hand shaking violently. He looked at the house one final time. For a moment, just one moment, he hesitated. I held my breath and prayed to a God I had not spoken to in years. Drop it, son. Blow it out. Walk away. But the terror of the loan sharks, the poison his wife had dripped into him, the decay at his core, it was all too far along. He flicked his wrist. The match tumbled through the air end over end. It touched down on the fuel-drenched planks of the deck. Whoosh! The fire did not build gradually. It exploded. A wall of orange flame raced up the side of the house, consuming the dry wood with a roaring hunger. The heat hit, immediately warping the air in visible waves. Everard lurched backward, throwing his arm up to shield his face from the sudden inferno. He turned and ran, vanishing into the darkness of the neighbor's yard, abandoning the home that had raised him to the flames. I kept filming. I filmed the fire climbing the window frames. I filmed the siding curling and turning black. I filmed the destruction of my past. Tears finally broke loose down my face, hot and bitter. I did not call the fire department. I had no need to. I had wired in a state-of-the-art silent alarm system linked directly to the station 3 blocks away. Within minutes, the wail of sirens tore through the night. Red lights strobed through the trees. The firefighters arrived dragging hoses, sending jets of water against the blaze, fighting to hold the structure. But the real damage was already done, not to the house, which could be rebuilt, but to the bond between a father and his son, which had been incinerated completely. That was ash. I lowered the camera. I had the footage. I had the proof of a felony that carried a 20-year sentence. Let us go, Ignatius. I said, my voice rising from somewhere that felt like a grave. I have seen enough. As we drove away, the flickering light of the fire painting the windows orange, I felt something inside me die. The father was gone. Only the judge remained, and the sentence was going to be severe. The fire was out before sunrise. My suppression system, combined with the rapid response of the station 3 blocks away, meant that Everard had failed at arson, just as he had failed at everything else. The house was scorched, the siding blackened, the porch destroyed, but the frame stood solid. It was a testament to my engineering and a monument to his incompetence. I watched from the shadows as the police put the cuffs on him. He did not resist. He wept like a broken child. But just as they were loading him into the back of the cruiser, a white Audi screeched to a stop at the curb. Rochelle jumped out. She did not run to her husband. She ran straight to the nearest television news crew that had turned up to cover the fire in the historic district. She was a vision of manufactured anguish. Her hair was artfully disheveled, her makeup smeared precisely enough to suggest devastation. She snatched the microphone from a startled reporter and launched into the most polished performance of her life. "Please help us," she cried into the lens, her voice fracturing with rehearsed emotion. "My husband is not a criminal. He is a victim. We are victims of a tyrant. His father, Cornelius Hatch, is a monster who has financially abused us for years. He cut us off because I am white, because he despises our marriage, because he wants to control every breath we take." Everard was desperate. He just wanted to be free. It was a narrative masterpiece. In 30 seconds, she had flipped the entire script. She took a case of clear-cut felony arson and repackaged it as a story of racial tension and generational trauma. She played the victim card, the race card, and the poverty card simultaneously, and the world swallowed every word. By noon, Everard was out on bail. Rochelle had likely pawned her engagement ring or located a predatory bail bondsman willing to gamble on a high-profile case. They walked out of the precinct side by side, flashing determined smiles at the paparazzi. They looked like freedom fighters, not felons. I sat in the safe house and watched the news cycle spiral out of control. The headlines were nauseating. Structural engineer empire built on son's suffering. Is Cornelius Hatch the meanest man in Philadelphia? The internet detectives dug up old photographs of me, looking stern on job sites, and set them beside pictures of Everard and Rochelle beaming at charity galas. They painted me as the villain, a wealthy hoarder sitting on millions while his son went hungry. By evening, the protests had started. They never found the safe house, thank God, but they found the main house still carrying the smell of smoke. A crowd gathered on the lawn, clutching signs that read, "Justice for Everard," and "Stop Financial Abuse." They hurled eggs at the blackened siding. They chanted my name with contempt. Celestine saw it on television before I could reach the remote. She saw the furious faces, the fire trucks, the image of her son looking battered and forlorn. "Why do they hate us, Corny?" she asked, her voice shaking. Her hand trembled so badly she spilled her tea. "Did we do something wrong? Is Everard hurt?" Watching her fear tore open something inside me that I had not known was still intact. I had built a fortune to protect her. I had survived wars to keep her safe. And now my own son had turned the public into a weapon aimed directly at her in her final years. I switched off the television. I crossed to her and knelt down, taking both her hands in mine. "We did nothing wrong, Selly," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Everard is lost, but I'm going to fix it." I rose and walked to the window. I stood looking out at the city skyline, a skyline I had helped raise from the ground. It became clear to me in that moment that I could not win this war from the shadows. Ignatius's legal maneuvers were brilliant, but they moved too slowly. The court of public opinion travels at the speed of light, and I was falling behind. If I remained silent, I was guilty. If I fought back through lawyers, I was a bully. I needed to change the game entirely. I needed to give them precisely what they claimed they wanted. I picked up the phone and called Ignatius. "Stop the lawsuits," I said. What? Ignatius sputtered on the other end. Corny, we have them cornered. The arson evidence is airtight. It does not matter, I said. The jury pool is being poisoned at this very moment. If we go to trial next month, half the city will be rooting for Everard to walk free. They see a struggling son fighting a wealthy father. We need to kill the narrative. How do you propose we do that? Ignatius asked. We give them a spectacle, I said. Rochelle wants the spotlight. Everard wants the money. The public wants a climax. Let us give all of them what they are after. I want you to book the Grand Ballroom at the Four Seasons for this Saturday night. Send press releases to every major news outlet. Invite the mayor, invite the protesters, and send a personal invitation to Everard and Rochelle. Corny, what exactly are you planning? Ignatius asked, his tone dropping with caution. Tell them I am stepping down, I said. Tell them the fire was a wake-up call. Tell them I have reflected on my failings, and I am prepared to reconcile. Tell them I am going to sign over the entire Hatch estate, the company, the patents, the properties to my son, live on television. A long silence settled on the line. Ignatius knew me. He knew I would sooner light my own money on fire than surrender it to the people who had abused my wife. He understood this was not a concession. It was a trap. This is a high-wire act, Ignatius finally said. If anything goes wrong, you lose everything. I have already lost my son, I replied. All I have left is my dignity and my wife's peace of mind. Book the room, Ignatius. I ended the call. The plan was in motion. I was going to invite the vultures to a feast. I was going to let them dress in their finest and stand before the cameras convinced they had triumphed. I was going to let Rochelle gloat. I was going to let Everard perform the role of the forgiving son. And then when every eye in the city was fixed on that stage, I was going to drop the blade. I looked over at Celestine, who was humming a soft hymn to herself, rocking gently. Don't worry, baby, I whispered. The patriarch is going to hold court one final time, and Judgment Day is almost here. The Grand Ballroom of the Four Seasons. Grand Ballroom was a cavern of crystal and gold built to make powerful men feel at home, and the uninvited feel small. I stood behind the heavy velvet curtains of the stage, watching the monitor trained on the main entrance. It was a circus out there. The press had arrived in full force, hungry for the finale of the family drama that had consumed the city for a week. They wanted to see the tyrant father bow his head. They wanted to witness the prodigal son's triumphant return. And then they appeared. A black limousine rolled to the curb, likely rented on credit or perhaps financed by a tabloid in exchange for exclusive rights to the victory celebration. The door swung open and Everard stepped out. He was transformed. Gone was the sweat-soaked, terrified arsonist who had poured gasoline on his childhood home just days before. In his place stood a martyr in a navy blue suit. He looked somber, dignified, and tragically misunderstood. He reached back into the car and took Rochelle's hand as she stepped out. She was dressed in white. Of course, she was a modest white dress designed to telegraph purity and innocence, a calculated contrast to the poison I knew ran through her. She pressed herself to his arm, looking fragile, looking brave. They walked the red carpet like royalty returning from exile. Camera flashes detonated around them, blinding white lightning in the night. Reporters shoved microphones at their faces and called out questions. Everard raised one hand in a gesture of magnanimous restraint. Please, he said, his voice pitched perfectly for the cameras. We are only here to heal. My father has finally agreed to do the right thing. We just want to be a family again. Rochelle pressed a tissue to a dry eye. We forgive him, she whispered just loud enough for 3 news crews to capture it. Dementia is a terrible disease. We understand he was not himself when he froze our accounts. We are simply grateful he is receiving the help he needs and that the estate will soon be in capable hands. I watched from the darkness, my hands folded behind my back. It was a masterclass in manipulation. They were walking straight into the lion's den, fully convinced they were the ones holding the whip. They entered the ballroom, and the crowd parted around them. I had invited everyone, the board members who had terminated Everard, the bankers who had rejected his loan applications, the neighbors who had stood on the street watching the fire, even a handful of the protesters who had thrown eggs at my house. I wanted witnesses. I wanted the entire city to see exactly who my son was. Everard and Rochelle moved through the room, pressing flesh and accepting condolences for their ordeal. They surveyed the buffet tables stacked with lobster and caviar. They clocked the open bar. They studied the stage where a single podium waited in the spotlight. I watched the greed ignite behind their eyes. They were already spending the money in their heads. They were already redesigning the beach house. Their eyes swept the room, searching for the attorneys, searching for the documents that would transfer my life's work into their names. Ignatius stood beside the stage steps, stone-faced and still. Everard approached him, wearing a smug smile. "Where is the old man, then?" Everard asked loud enough for the guests nearby to hear. "Is he ready to sign? Mr. Hatch will address the guests shortly." Ignatius replied, giving nothing. "Make sure the notary is prepared." Rochelle added her voice, clipped beneath its sugary surface. "We do not want this to drag on. We have endured enough." They took their places at the front table, the one reserved for guests of honor. They settled into their chairs like monarchs. Everard draped his arm along the back of Rochelle's chair. They leaned together and murmured to each other, almost certainly laughing about how easily I had broken under the pressure. They believed I had buckled beneath the weight of bad publicity. They thought I was desperate to salvage my reputation. They had no idea that a man who has nothing left to lose is the most dangerous creature alive. The lights in the ballroom dimmed. The murmur of the crowd faded, swallowed by a heavy, expectant quiet. A single spotlight knifed through the dark and found the podium. The moment had arrived. I came out from behind the curtain, moving with deliberate slowness, leaning hard on a cane I had no real use for. I wore a black suit, old-fashioned but cut with precision. I wanted to embody the past. I wanted to look like something history had already decided. I stepped into that circle of light and blinked against the glare. I scanned the sea of faces before me, reporters with cameras rolling, board members wearing expressions that said they weren't buying any of it. And right there in the front row, Everard and Rochelle, bodies pitched forward, eyes bright with hunger. They had come to watch me surrender. I wrapped both hands around the sides of the podium. My hands didn't shake. "Good evening," I said. My voice was gravel-wrapped in steel, the speakers stretching it into every last corner of the room. "Thank you all for being here." I let the pause sit until it turned uncomfortable. "Most of you know me as Cornelius Hatch, the engineer," I went on. "You know me as the man who shaped this city's skyline. You know my steel, you know my concrete. But this past week you've come to know me as something else entirely, a father." Everard gave a solemn nod, playing his role, the grieving son doing his duty. I fixed my gaze on him and held it. "I'm standing here tonight to speak a hard truth," I said, dropping my voice to something low and mournful, a truth that no father ever wants to say out loud. "I have failed." A gasp moved through the room. Rochelle squeezed Everard's hand with barely concealed triumph. This was it as far as they were concerned, the confession, the surrender. "I failed in the most important duty I had," I continued. "I spent 40 years building structures designed to survive earthquakes, to outlast hurricanes. I ran the load calculations. I reinforced the foundations. But while I was raising towers, I let the foundation of my own home crack and crumble." My eyes went to the papers on the small table beside the podium, the transfer documents. "My son Everard is convinced he's entitled to everything I built," I said. "He believes that bearing my name makes him heir to my fortune. And for a long time, I believed it too. I thought that handing him everything would make a man of him. I paid for his education. I bankrolled his lifestyle. I pulled him out of every hole he dug himself into." Everard's smile slipped a fraction. This wasn't what he'd rehearsed for. He shifted in his seat. "But I was wrong," I said, my voice climbing, gathering force. "What I raised wasn't a man. I raised a parasite." The entire ballroom went still. Every molecule of air seemed to leave the space at once. Rochelle's smile disappeared, replaced by sharp, baffled alarm. "And tonight," I pressed on, unstoppable. "Tonight, I'm here to correct what I got wrong. You all came expecting a transfer of power. You came to watch Cornelius Hatch hand his empire to his son, to end the protests, to salvage his reputation." I lifted the thick sheaf of legal documents off the table and raised them up in the spotlight. Everard lurched halfway out of his seat, face bloodless. "Dad, what are you doing?" "Sit down, Everard," I said. The voice that came out of me was not an old man's voice. It was the voice of the man who built this city. "I am not signing these papers over to you," I said, "because there is nothing left to sign over." I tore the documents clean in two. The sound cracked through the silence like a gunshot. I tossed the pieces into the air and watched them drift down like snowfall, settling across Everard's expensive shoes. He stared at the scraps on the floor, then up at me, his face contorted in pure horror. "What did you do?" he screamed. I leaned into the microphone. I sold it, I said. I sold it all. The company, the patents, the land, the house you tried to burn to the ground. I sold every last piece of it 3 days ago while you were out giving interviews to the press. The crowd erupted. Reporters were shouting questions over one another. Flashbulbs strobed through the room. Everard lunged across the table, scattering glasses and centerpieces. "You're lying!" he shrieked, his voice cracking into something high and wild. "You can't sell it. That's my inheritance." "It was never yours," I said, calm as stone. "It was mine, and now it belongs to the Celestine Hatch Foundation for the Protection of the Elderly." I pointed to the large screen behind me. "And if you want to understand why, Everard, if you want to know why I left you with nothing, look at that screen." I pressed the button on the remote. The screen flickered to life. Not a chart, not a financial summary, a video file, grainy high-contrast black and white footage from inside a hospital room, and then the audio came on. "Pull the plug, Everard. We need the insurance money." Rochelle's voice flooded the ballroom, bouncing off the crystal chandeliers, stripping them both bare in front of the entire world. The vulture's feast was finished. The reckoning had begun. Those words, Rochelle demanding that my life support be cut, hung in the air like something poisonous. The silence that settled in their wake was total. 1,000 people, not one of them breathing. Everard stood frozen near the stage, his face a pale, hollow mask, as the words played back around him. "Pull the plug. We need the money." But I wasn't finished. I pressed the remote again, and the screen shifted. The grainy footage gave way to sharp, high-definition color video. Night. The camera angle was elevated, mounted on a neighbor's roofline, looking down. At the center of the frame stood a man in a black hoodie, looking small and cornered in the dark. But when he turned his face toward the street lamp, there was no question who it was. Everard, holding a red gas can. The crowd pulled in a collective breath of horror that rolled across the entire ballroom. On screen, my son began pouring gasoline onto the porch of the house he'd grown up in. He splashed it over the threshold. He soaked the wooden siding. The footage was crisp, clear, and merciless. It caught him striking the match. It caught the orange flare of the fire reflected in his terrified eyes. It caught him bolting into the night, abandoning his childhood home to the flames. I watched the reporters swivel their cameras away from the podium and train them directly on Everard. The flashbulbs that had celebrated him minutes ago were now interrogating him. He looked around wildly for some way out, but he was pinned inside the glare of what he'd done. Then the video changed one final time. This footage was from inside the safe house, captured by the hidden camera in the doorbell before I let them in to run their kidnapping scheme. It showed Rochelle on the porch fixing her hair while Everard paced behind her. The audio was crystal clear. "I hate this." She spat on the recording, her face curled into a sneer that the cameras in the ballroom caught in every ugly detail. "I hate pretending to care about that old man and his wife. God, she is useless. Just a senile old black woman taking up space. Once we get the power of attorney signed, I'm dumping her in the cheapest facility I can find. If she dies in a week, it's a blessing. It saves us money on the monthly fees." The gasp in the room rolled into a roar. The racial slur, combined with that cold cruelty toward a sick elderly woman, shattered whatever spell Rochelle had held over this city. The protesters who had massed outside to rally behind this young couple were watching the live feed on their phones, and I could hear the mood of the crowd outside, turning support, curdling into fury. Rochelle pressed her hands over her ears, as though she could muffle her own voice. But the speakers had no mercy, driving her hatred into every corner of that room until there was nowhere left to hide. She looked at the screen, she looked at the crowd, and she watched her social standing burn faster than my house had. I stepped back to the podium. I didn't need to raise my voice. The microphone picked up my low, graveled tone and carried it out over the murmurs of the room. "You wanted a show," I said, looking down at my son and his wife, who were now pressed against each other like survivors clinging to wreckage. "You wanted the world to see who Cornelius Hatch really was. Well, here I am, and there you are." Everard looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed and wet. "Dad," he choked out his voice, barely finding air. "Dad, please turn it off." I didn't. I lifted a single sheet of paper from the podium, a bank confirmation slip. For the past week, I continued addressing the room. My family has told anyone who would listen that I'm a hoarder, a tyrant hoarding a fortune while they go without. They claimed desperation drove them to burn my house down, just to survive. They claimed they needed to have me committed to a care facility for my own protection. I raised the paper. They were right about one thing. I had been sitting on a fortune, my patents, my real estate holdings, my stock portfolio. The total came to approximately $15 million. That number hung in the air. 15 million. Even through the horror, greed flickered across more than a few faces in that room. Everard's head came up fast. He stared at that paper like it was something sacred. But you were wrong about everything else, I said, my voice going hard as iron. You are not my heirs. You are my failures. I let that land, let the weight of it settle over the room. 3 days ago, while you were busy giving interviews and casting yourselves as victims, I was busy conducting business. I liquidated everything. Sold the land, sold the patent rights to a technology firm in Seoul, sold the shell companies. Everard shoved back his chair. It shrieked against the floor as he stood. You can't do that, he shouted, desperation stripping away whatever dignity he had left. That money belongs to the family. It's held in trust. It was held in a revocable trust, I said evenly, and I revoked it. I directed the room's attention back to the screen. A new image appeared, a clean, elegant logo bearing the silhouette of my wife, the Celestine Hatch Foundation. 3 days ago, at 9 o'clock in the morning, the wire transfer cleared, I said. Every single penny. All $15 million donated irrevocably to the Celestine Hatch Foundation. Its mission: legal aid and safe housing for elderly victims of financial abuse. The room came apart. Pure chaos. Reporters were shouting into their phones. Board members had their heads together in furious whispers. But Everard and Rochelle had gone completely silent. They stood there stripped bare. The money they had schemed for, the money they had torched a house for, the money they had sold their souls for. Gone. Not frozen. Not hidden away somewhere. Gone forever. Put to work fighting people exactly like them. You gave it away, Rochelle shrieked, her voice slicing through the din. You donated our money to some charity, you crazy old man. You stole our future. I did not steal your future, I replied. I simply refused to fund it. You are young, you are healthy, you have 2 working hands. Go earn a living the way I did. Everard looked at me with a hatred so undiluted it was almost blinding. The grieving son, the wounded heir, that mask was completely gone. What remained was the face of someone I no longer recognized, a man eaten alive by entitlement and rage. He understood now that there was no path back. No reconciliation waiting around the corner. No check that was going to arrive. He was broke. He was exposed. He was cornered. He let out a guttural roar, raw animal frustration, with no other outlet. He snatched a steak knife from the nearest table, silver heavy, the kind meant for slicing prime rib. I am going to kill you, he screamed, and launched himself toward the stage. The crowd screamed and scattered chairs and glasses going over in every direction. Everard vaulted forward, his gaze locked on my throat, moving with the speed of a man who has burned every last bridge behind him. Rochelle didn't move to stop him. She stood and watched, her eyes wide and bright, hoping he'd finish what they'd started thinking, that if I died in this room, maybe some legal crack in the wall would open up for her to slip through. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I stood exactly where I was, cane in hand, watching my son come at me with murder written across his face. He reached the bottom of the stairs. Freeze, police. The command boomed from somewhere across the room, but Everard was past hearing it. He was too far gone. He got 1 foot on the first step, the knife raised. Then a body hit him from the side. One of the private security men I had hired, enormous former linebackers, connected with him like a freight train at full speed. Everard went airborne, crashing sideways into a table stacked with champagne flutes. Glass exploded in every direction. The knife spun out of his hand and skittered across the floor, coming to rest at the feet of Ignatius Cobb. Before Everard could get himself off the ground, 3 uniformed officers were on top of him. They drove him face down into the carpet, into the broken glass, and spilled wine. Get off me! He screamed, thrashing against the combined weight holding him there. He's the thief! Arrest him! He stole my life! Everard Hatch, an officer said, snapping the handcuffs onto his wrists tight enough to leave marks. You are under arrest for the attempted murder of Cornelius Hatch, felony arson, and conspiracy to commit fraud. You have the right to remain silent. I'd advise you to use it, Ignatius said, stepping forward and looking down at him, though I suspect it may be a little late for that. On the other side of the room, a second team of officers was closing in on Rochelle. She tried to dissolve into the crowd, angling toward the exit, but there was no opening. An officer caught her by the arm. "Rochelle Pirard, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, conspiracy, and elder abuse." "No!" she cried, wrenching against the grip, her composure finally shattering beyond any repair. "It wasn't me. It was him. Everard made me do everything. He's the violent one. Look at him. I'm the victim here. I'm just a wife." The officer turned her around and got the cuffs on her, letting her protests wash over him. The guests watched in stunned silence as the golden couple, the martyrs of the week, were marched out of that ballroom in chains. As they pulled Everard to his feet, he lifted his head toward me. Blood was running down his forehead from where his face had met the floor. He found me with his eyes one last time. "I hate you," he spat. "I wish you had died in that coma." I looked down at him from the height of the stage. The anger had drained out of me entirely. What was left was a deep, hollow sadness. "I know, son," I said quietly into the microphone, "and that is why you lost." The officers hauled him out. The heavy doors swung shut and cut off the sound of his voice. The ballroom settled into a stunned, near silence, broken only by the murmur of the crowd and the clicking of cameras. I looked out at all of them. I saw judgment in those faces. Awe, fear. They understood now. They understood that Cornelius Hatch was not a man to be taken lightly. They knew I would burn my own kingdom to the foundation before I let someone seize it who hadn't earned it. I glanced at Ignatius. He gave me a single slow nod, solemn, respectful. I turned back to the microphone one last time. "The bar is open," I said. "Enjoy the rest of your evening. I am going home to my wife." I turned and walked off that stage, my cane keeping a steady beat on the floor. I never looked back. The performance was done. The lesson had been delivered. The king had held his throne, but the castle stood empty now, and the victory had the taste of ash. The Philadelphia Industrial Correctional Center was a different universe from the luxury Everard had grown accustomed to. It was all gray concrete and steel bars, and the smell of sweat and fear pressed into every surface. My attorney Ignatius had given me the full report. Everard had been inside for 3 days and was already a broken man. His face was swollen from a beating he'd taken in the holding cell, a welcome from the general population who had little patience for a man who set fire to his own father's house. He sat hunched on the edge of his bunk in a 6x8 cell, making himself as small as he could. He was terrified. He knew that the loan sharks he owed money to had reached inside these walls. Every waking hour he watched the door, bracing for the hired knife that would end him. But death didn't come through that cell door. A guard did. A heavy-set man with a ring of keys that jangled like something funereal. "Hatch," the guard said. "Mail call." He dropped a large manila envelope onto the thin mattress. It hit with a dull, heavy thud. Everard stared at it without moving, as though the envelope itself might turn on him. He was expecting divorce papers from Rochelle, who was being held in the women's wing, a foreclosure notice, a death threat from Zenko the loan shark. With shaking hands, he finally reached out and took it. It was heavier than it looked. No return address, just his name written in handwriting he knew better than his own. My handwriting. He tore the envelope open. He reached inside and pulled out what was there. It was not a legal summons, not a check. It was a sheaf of papers yellowed with age, carrying the faint smell of the cedar chest where I had stored them for 25 years. They were drawings. Everard went still, the breath stopping in his throat. He looked down at the top sheet. It was a crayon drawing of a skyscraper, stretching all the way up to a blue sun. The lines were unsteady and the perspective was off, but the passion in it was unmistakable. At the bottom, in clumsy block letters, "The Hatch Tower by Everard, age 10. He shuffled through the rest. A bridge. A house with a tire swing. A drawing of the two of us in yellow hard hats hand in hand on a construction site. These were the relics of who he used to be. The dreams he carried before greed took root, before entitlement hollowed him out. He had wanted to build things. He had wanted to create, not destroy. He had wanted to be like me. He ran his bruised thumb along the waxy crayon lines. A sob tore out of him, raw and jagged. He remembered drawing these at the kitchen table while I worked through blueprints across from him. He remembered me putting them up on the refrigerator like they belonged in a gallery. He remembered the pride on my face when I looked at them. Beneath the stack of drawings was a single white envelope sealed with wax. He broke it open. Inside was a letter on my personal stationery. Everard began to read. I wasn't in that cell with him, but I knew precisely what those words would do. I had written them with the same care I brought to calculating the load-bearing capacity of a bridge. I needed to break him down so something could be rebuilt in the rubble. Everard, you are sitting in a cage that you built yourself out of lies and greed. You look at these drawings and you see the boy you once were. I look at them and I see the son I lost. You wanted my money, Everard. You wanted the finished product without putting in the work. You wanted the view from the summit without ever climbing the trail. You are scared right now. I know you are. You're watching the door waiting for Zenko's men to come through it. You owe them $100,000. Inside these walls, a debt like that is a death sentence. You think you are going to die in there. Everard stopped reading. His hands were trembling so badly the paper shook. He stared at the cell door, bracing for whoever might walk through it. Then he read on, "But you are not going to die, Everard. Not at their hands. I paid them." Everard's breath caught. He read the line again. "I paid them. Yesterday morning, before I finalized the donation to the foundation, I made one last withdrawal, $100,000 in personal liquid cash. I sat down with Mr. Zenko's associate. I bought your debt outright. It is paid in full. The sharks are gone. You are safe from them." Everard sagged against the cinder block wall and slid down it until he was sitting on the floor. He held the letter against his chest. His father, the man he had tried to kill, had just pulled him back from the edge. I had gone into that underworld and purchased his safety. The relief hit him like a wave breaking, leaving him limp and gasping. He was not going to die. I had made sure of it. He looked back down at the letter, expecting to find that I would bail him out next, that I was already lining up the best defense attorneys, that I would clean up this mess the way I had cleaned up every mess before it. He was wrong. I saved your life, Everard. The letter went on. Because you are my son, and I could not sit by and let you be slaughtered like an animal, I gave you that gift one final time, but it is the last thing I am giving you. I will not pay for your attorney. I will not post your bail. I will not come to see you. I have saved your body, but I cannot save your soul. That is yours to do. You are going to prison, Everard. You are going to serve your sentence. You are going to lose your license, your reputation, and your freedom. And while you are in there, you are going to look at those drawings. You are going to remember the boy who wanted to build things. I cleared the path so you could survive, but you have to walk it yourself. Do not call me. Do not write to me when you get out in 10 or 15 years. If you have become a man who can look me in the eye, then perhaps we can talk. But until that day, you are on your own. This is my final gift to you. The chance to hit rock bottom without it killing you. Build something from the ashes, son. Or stay in them. The choice is finally yours. Cornelius Hatch. Everard let out a wail that echoed through the cell block. Pure heartbreak in a single sound. He curled into himself on the concrete floor, clutching the drawings and the letter against his body. He cried for the father he had betrayed. He cried for the wife who had pulled him down with her. He cried for the years thrown away and the chances he'd burned. For the first time in his life, he had nowhere to put the blame. No safety net waiting below him, no checkbook to make it disappear. Only the cold, hard weight of everything he had done. I had given him the most brutal kind of love a father can manage. I had let him fall, but I had slipped something soft beneath him so the landing wouldn't finish him. He looked at the drawing of the tower, reaching for the sun. He traced the words, Everard, age 10. The boy who drew it was gone, but maybe the man holding it could find his way back to him. I sat in the safe house miles away with a phantom ache in my chest. I knew he was reading it. I knew he was in tears. It cost me something to do what I had done. It cost me something to be the judge and the hand that carried out the sentence against my own child. But it was what the moment required. I had saved his life. The rest was up to him. The war with my son was over. But Rochelle still needed one final, precise strike. She was out on bail ahead of her federal trial, sitting in her parents' basement and trying to reshape the story on social media. She was positioning herself as a battered wife, a casualty of the Hatch family patriarchy. She believed she could still win in the court of public opinion, even if the court of law went against her. She was wrong. Prison wasn't enough for me. I wanted her dismantled. I wanted to make certain she could never prey on another family the way she had preyed on mine. I sat across from Ignatius in his office, that mahogany desk buried under paperwork. We were filing a civil suit for defamation, character assassination, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. But the real weapon wasn't the lawsuit. It was what we attached to it. We sent a full dossier to the State Real Estate Commission, the video of her abusing Celestine, the audio of her plotting fraud, and the police report documenting the arson conspiracy. The effect was immediate and total. 2 days later, the notice came through. The board had called an emergency session. Rochelle's real estate license was revoked, permanently, blacklisted. The career she had constructed on false charm and ruthless calculation was gone in an instant. But I didn't stop there. Ignatius leaked the revocation to the industry blogs. Within hours, she was radioactive. Her agency fired her publicly, putting out a statement to separate themselves from the damage. The social climbers she had spent years trying to impress blocked her number without a second thought. I watched her unravel from a distance. She posted a video crying, screaming about injustice, but the comment section showed no mercy. The public had already seen the footage of her mocking my wife. There was nothing left to salvage. She was isolated, unemployable, and staring down a federal prison sentence. She had wanted my house. Now she'd be lucky to find a landlord willing to rent her a studio. I signed the last of the legal documents with a steady hand and closed the book on Rochelle Pirard. She was no longer my concern. She was a ghost haunting the outline of a life she used to have. With the enemies cleared from the field, it was time to leave it behind. We didn't pack much. 2 suitcases, that was all. That was what 40 years of building came down to in the end. I looked at the piles of clothes, the furniture, the small objects that accumulate over a lifetime, and what I felt was simply exhaustion. I left it all. I told Ignatius to donate whatever anyone could use and throw out the rest. I had no desire to carry the physical weight of this city any further. The morning we left was gray and wet, a fitting send-off for the life I was walking away from. No farewell gathering. No tearful goodbyes with the neighbors. Those same neighbors had watched the news and made their judgments before they knew a single true thing. I didn't owe them a wave goodbye. I helped Celestine into her coat. She looked fragile standing there, but her eyes held a clarity I hadn't seen in weeks. The weight of the house, the grinding tension of the family war, all of it had been feeding her confusion. In the quiet of that morning, she seemed to breathe easier. "Where are we going, Corny?" she asked, working the buttons of her coat with unsteady fingers. "We're going on a trip, Celly," I told her gently. "A long trip to somewhere the sun never stops shining, and nobody knows who we are." I walked her out to the car waiting at the curb. No limousine, just a simple rideshare. The driver had no idea he was carrying a man who had just moved $15 million and outmaneuvered his own son. He just saw 2 elderly black people with 2 small suitcases stepping out of an unremarkable apartment building. We rode to the airport without speaking, watching Philadelphia unspool past the windows. I saw the skylines. I had helped design those bridges. My invisible hand was pressed into every reinforced joint of that city's bones. I had poured my blood and sweat into building this country's foundations. And what it had handed me in return was a son who wanted me in the ground and a system that nearly let him put me there. I felt a deep, settled detachment. The anger was gone. I was simply finished. America had once been a place of possibility for me, but it had turned into a graveyard for everything I'd believed in. I was ready for something else entirely. At the airport, we moved through the terminal like 2 people no one was looking for. We found our seats on the plane. When the engines came alive and the wheels left the ground, I pressed my face to the window and looked down at the city one final time. Somewhere below, my son was in a cell staring at the drawings of a boy he used to be. Somewhere below, his wife was surveying the wreckage she had made of her own life. I turned away from the window. I reached over and took Celestine's hand. She looked at me and smiled, a real smile, warm and full, the kind that lit up the space around her. "Are we flying?" she asked with the pure delight of a child. "Yes, baby," I said. "We are flying." We were leaving it all behind, the pain, the treachery, the cold gray winter. We were headed toward the equator, toward Ghana, toward the home I had built in secret over all those quiet years. We were flying toward peace, and for the first time in longer than I could measure, I felt like something had been lifted off me. The sun above the Gulf of Guinea is nothing like the sun over Philadelphia. It carries no judgment. It simply warms you. We had been there a year now, settled into a villa perched on a cliff above the ocean. A stark contrast to the metaphorical cliff my son had tried to push us off. The air here smelled of salt and hibiscus, not exhaust and betrayal. The only sounds were the waves breaking against the rocks below and the wind moving through the palms. I sat on the veranda watching Celestine. She was in a wide wicker chair wearing a dress cut from bright local fabric, vivid yellows and blues that were made for her complexion. She looked 10 years younger. The tension that had carved deep lines into her face back in the States, the constant dread of the nursing home, the confusion that Rochelle's cruelty had made so much worse it had dissolved in the tropical warmth. She was humming, a gospel song she used to sing in the choir 40 years ago. She stopped and turned toward me. Her eyes were clear, sharp, present. For months she had called me Sir, or simply him, unable to locate my face in the fractured corridors of her memory. But now she looked straight at me, and the smile that followed reached all the way to her eyes. "Reginald," she said, soft and certain. "Cornelius Hatch, my husband." My coffee cup stopped halfway to my mouth. It was the first time she had spoken my full name in 2 years. The doctors back in Philadelphia had told me her decline was irreversible. The doctors here told me that peace was the most powerful medicine. I crossed the veranda and pressed my lips to her forehead, my hand trembling as I did it. "I am here, baby," I whispered. "I am right here." "You built this house?" she said, her gaze moving out toward the horizon. "It is strong like you." I swallowed against the tightness in my throat. I had built towers that pierced the clouds, but this single moment of recognition was the finest thing I had ever constructed. I had pulled her out of the fire. I had carried her to a place where she could mend. My phone vibrated on the table and broke the stillness. A satellite phone, the one thin thread connecting me to the world I had left behind. I picked it up. A notification from a bank in the Cayman Islands. Quarterly dividend payment received. The figure was 6 digits. I allowed myself a quiet, private smile. Everard and Rochelle had believed I gave every last dollar away. They thought I had donated myself into destitution. What they forgot is that a man who builds bridges always keeps a toll booth for himself. I had held on to a minority stake in several key international patents. I was still wealthy. I always would be. But staring at those numbers on the screen, I found that they meant almost nothing to me, just pixels. Scorekeeping for a game I had walked away from. That money couldn't purchase the sharpness I had just seen in Celestine's eyes. It couldn't buy the ocean breeze or the quiet that had settled into my chest. I held the phone a moment longer. I considered pulling up the news to see whether Everard had been sentenced yet. I thought about checking in on the Foundation's work. Then I looked at the water. I got up and walked to the edge of the terrace. Below, the Atlantic spread out in turquoise and white. I drew my arm back and threw the phone as far as I could. It tumbled through the air, catching the African sun before it hit the surface and disappeared. It sank to the bottom, taking the bank alerts, the news feeds, and the memory of my ungrateful son down with it. I went back and sat beside my wife, folding her hand into mine. Far away in a cold gray cell in Pennsylvania, Everard was waking up to steel bars and the weight of everything he had done. He was a prisoner of his own past, locked inside the consequences of his greed. He had wanted my life. Instead, he handed me a new one. People say revenge is a dish best served cold. They are wrong. The greatest revenge is not the destruction of your enemy. It is the healing of yourself. It is building a life so full, so complete, and so at peace that your enemy no longer occupies any room inside it. I had lost a son, but I had found myself. I closed my eyes listening to the ocean and the steady, quiet breathing of the woman I had loved my entire life. The king had retired, and for the first time in 71 years, I was finally free. This journey handed me a hard but necessary truth. Blood does not guarantee loyalty. For decades, I built structures engineered to stand against the worst storms. Yet, I could not see the rod of entitlement taking hold inside my own walls. True strength isn't in the wealth you accumulate, it's in the courage to walk away from those who see you as nothing more than an asset to be seized. You cannot buy respect. And sometimes the deepest act of love is stepping back and letting people answer for the cold consequences of their own greed. If you have stayed with me this far, then you already know this was never just a story about money or betrayal. It was about what a man will carry and what he will finally lay down. Looking back on everything, the coma, the pantry, the forged trust, the ballroom, the letter I wrote to my son from a place of grief rather than anger, I understand now what it cost me. It cost me the version of fatherhood I had always believed in. I had spent 40 years building structures meant to outlast me, and I never noticed the cracks forming in my own home. I believe God allowed me to wake up in that hospital bed at exactly the right moment, not just to survive, but to finally see clearly. Here is what this family revenge story taught me and what I hope you carry with you. First, protect your legacy while you are still standing. Do not wait for a crisis to organize what you have built. Second, love your children deeply, but never let love become a substitute for accountability, yours or theirs. Third, when people show you who they are through their actions, believe them the first time, not the fifth. Fourth, for any adults, 50 plus, who feel invisible or vulnerable, you are not. Your wisdom, your patience, and your long view are your greatest assets. Do not let anyone rush you into surrendering them. If this story moved you, leave a comment and tell me what stayed with you. If you know someone who needs to hear it, a parent, a friend, anyone carrying a quiet hurt, please pass it along. And if you have not yet subscribed to Honor Revenge Stories, now is the time. There are more stories waiting, and every one of them is for people who refuse to be counted out. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next one.